My husband handed me a suitcase in the middle of my own kitchen and said, "You can stay with your sister until you calm down. Vanessa needs the condo more than you do." Vanessa was standing behind him in my white silk robe, barefoot on the heated marble floor I had paid for before Ethan ever learned what an escrow account was. She was drinking coffee from my mug, the one my father gave me when I passed the bar exam, and smiling like she had just been promoted from mistress to homeowner. Ethan crossed his arms and said, "Don't make this ugly, Juliet. The condo is marital property. I have rights here too." I did not scream. I did not throw the mug. I did not ask how long he had been bringing her into my home while I was traveling for work. I simply picked up my phone, called the front desk, and said, "Marcus, deactivate every access card attached to Ethan Caldwell and Vanessa Price, effective immediately." For 3 seconds, nobody spoke. Ethan blinked like I had switched languages. Vanessa's smile disappeared so quickly it almost made the whole scene worth it. On the other end, Marcus, our head concierge, lowered his voice and asked, "Mrs. Monroe, would you like security sent up?" I kept my eyes on Ethan and said, "Have them wait by elevator bank 3. Ethan laughed, but it came out too sharp, too nervous. "You can't do that," he said. "I already did," I answered. Vanessa looked at him then, really looked at him, as if she had been promised a kingdom and was suddenly wondering why the queen still had the keys. Before I continue, if someone in your life has ever mistaken your kindness for permission, you will understand why I stayed calm that morning. I am a commercial property attorney. My entire job is reading the sentence everyone else skips and finding the clause that changes everything. Ethan knew I hated public scenes, and he counted on that. He thought I would take the suitcase, leave quietly, cry privately, and let him explain our marriage to everyone before I could explain the facts. What he forgot was that I had spent 15 years building a career around facts. The condo was Unit 1802 in Harbor Line Tower, a glass building overlooking downtown Chicago. Ethan loved calling it our place at dinner parties. He loved saying, "our view," "our parking spaces," "our building," as if repeating ownership language could create ownership. What he never told people was that I bought the condo 3 years before our wedding through Monroe Harbor Holdings, my property company. What he never knew, because he never bothered to ask, was that Monroe Harbor Holdings did not only own Unit 1802. It owned the entire 18th floor, 1,801, 1,802, 1,803, the private storage suite, and both deeded parking spaces he liked to brag about. Ethan thought I was just a lawyer with a good salary. That was one of his more useful mistakes. I let him believe it, because men like Ethan get affectionate around money they think they can control. For 7 years, I had watched him enjoy the life I built while quietly resenting the woman who built it. He called me cold when I would not fund his second failed consulting expansion. He called me controlling when I asked why his business account was overdrawn again. His mother, Carol, said a wife should make her husband feel like a man, which apparently meant paying his debts and pretending he earned the marble under his feet. That morning, he shoved the suitcase closer to me with his shoe. "Go to your sister's, Juliet. Cool down. Vanessa and I need space to figure things out." I looked down at the suitcase. He had packed badly. One of my blazers was caught in the zipper. My running shoes had been thrown on top of silk blouses. There was something almost more insulting about that than the affair itself. This man touching my clothes, choosing what pieces of my life I was allowed to carry away from my own home. "You went through my closet?" I asked. He shrugged. "You weren't here." Vanessa finally spoke. "I really don't want drama," she said softly, as if she had accidentally wandered into my kitchen instead of sleeping in my bed. I turned to her. "Did Ethan tell you my name is on the deed?" Her eyes flicked toward him. Ethan stepped in front of her. "Don't talk to her like that." That almost made me laugh. For 7 years, he had gone silent when his mother insulted me, when his friends joked that I wore the pants because someone had to pay for them, when his business partner called me the legal department with legs. But now, with his mistress wearing my robe, he had suddenly discovered how to defend a woman. My phone buzzed. Marcus had texted me. "Card suspended. Elevator access restricted. Security standing by." I typed back. "Good." Ethan saw me and lunged for my phone. I stepped back just enough that he missed. "Don't," I said. His face hardened. "You are embarrassing yourself." I looked at him calmly. "No, Ethan. You packed a suitcase for the owner." His jaw tightened. "You own one condo." I tilted my head. "Do I?" Vanessa's face changed. She heard what he did not. That was when Ethan grabbed his own phone and said, "I'm calling my mother." Of course he was. Carol Caldwell had been narrating our marriage from the sidelines since the day I signed the prenup. He put her on speaker after 30 seconds of whispering. "Juliet," Carol snapped, "without even saying hello, stop this nonsense. That condo is Ethan's home." I said, "It was his residence by permission." She laughed. "Permission? He is your husband, not a tenant." I looked at Ethan. "Then he should not have given a vendor code to his girlfriend for Unit 1803. The kitchen went silent. Vanessa whispered. It was the first honest sound she had made all morning. He turned red. "That's not what happened." But it was. Marcus had already sent the access logs while I was in the elevator coming up. Vanessa Price had entered Unit 1803 4 times that week, using a temporary vendor code issued by Ethan's consulting company. There was no approved delivery, no contractor visit, no work order. Ethan had staged his mistress in the empty unit next door before trying to move her into mine. He just did not know the empty unit next door was also mine. Carol's voice cut through the speaker. "Ethan, call the police. She cannot throw you out of your marital residence." I almost thanked her. Arrogant people are most useful when they escalate before checking documents. Ethan seized the suggestion immediately. "Overwhelmed?" "Fine," he said. "You want legal? We'll get legal." While he dialed, I walked to the hall closet and took out a cream-colored envelope. Inside were copies of the deed, the premarital asset schedule, the Monroe Harbor Holdings operating agreement, and the building access policy. My father taught me that if someone challenges your right to stand in a room, you should never have to search for proof that the floor belongs to you. The police arrived 12 minutes later. Ethan rushed to them first, wounded and theatrical. "My wife is having some kind of breakdown," he said. "She locked me out of my own home and threatened my guest." I handed the female officer the envelope. "My name is Juliet Monroe. I own Unit 1802 as premarital property through my holding company. My husband gave an unauthorized guest access to restricted units using a false vendor purpose. I have not threatened anyone. I restricted building access pending documentation review." The officer read the first page, then looked at Ethan. "Whose name is on the deed?" Ethan said. "We're married." she repeated. Whose name is on the deed? That was the first time Ethan had no answer. Vanessa left 10 minutes later with security escorting her to the service elevator. Ethan was not arrested, but the officers documented the access dispute and warned him that any further unauthorized entry could become a trespass issue. Before leaving, he leaned close and hissed, "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." I looked at the suitcase he had packed for me. "No," I said. "I finally stopped carrying yours." After he left, my phone buzzed with an email from Harborline Tower Management. The subject line read, "Urgent review required. Spousal occupancy addendum submitted." I opened it at my kitchen island, still standing beside the suitcase my husband thought would remove me from my own life. The form listed Vanessa Price as an approved long-term resident of Unit 1802. Ethan's electronic signature was at the bottom. And beneath it, in the owner authorization field, was a signature that was supposed to be mine, except I had never signed it. By noon, Ethan had already decided that paperwork was not enough to beat me, so he reached for the oldest weapon weak men use against calm women. He called me unstable. The first message came from Carol at 12:17 p.m. It was not sent to me. It was sent to a family group chat Ethan had forgotten I was still in. Carol wrote, "Please pray for Ethan. Juliet had a frightening episode this morning and had police called to the condo. We are trying to protect everyone involved." I stared at the message for a long moment, then took a screenshot. 3 little dots appeared under my sister-in-law Tessa's name. Then my brother-in-law replied, "Is Ethan safe?" Not what happened. Not, "Is Juliet okay?" Just Ethan. Safe. As if the man who moved his mistress into my home had survived a natural disaster. Ethan texted me 5 minutes later. "You need help. Mom is worried." I replied with nothing. Silence was not weakness anymore. It was evidence management. The more they talked, the cleaner the file became. Carol sent another message, this time directly to me. "A decent wife would not humiliate her husband in front of building staff. You have always cared more about control than love." I saved that too. Then came a message from Ethan's best friend, Mason, a man who had borrowed my lake house twice and still called me intense. He wrote, "Ethan says you locked him out over a misunderstanding. Don't destroy your marriage over pride." I saved that as well, because smear campaigns are like cheap wallpaper. They look ugly by themselves, but when you line up enough strips, you can see the pattern. I spent the next hour doing what Ethan should have feared from the beginning. I opened my laptop, logged into the Harborline owner portal, and downloaded every document tied to Unit 1802 from the last 30 days. The fake spousal occupancy addendum had been submitted at 8:14 that morning, 42 minutes before I walked into the kitchen. That meant Ethan had not panicked and forged something after the confrontation. He had planned it. Vanessa Price was listed as a temporary family resident during marital transition. Under relationship to owner, someone had typed spouse-approved caregiver. I almost laughed at that. Caregiver. The woman in my robe drinking from my mug was apparently there to care for my husband through the terrible illness of being caught. The owner authorization signature was a poor attempt at mine. Ethan had seen my signature on enough closing documents to imitate the shape, but he did not know the difference between a signature and a legal authorization. My signature on real estate documents always included my middle initial when signing for Monroe Harbor Holdings. This one did not. Worse for him, The IP address attached to the submission traced to Caldwell Strategic Consulting's office network, the same office I had paid the first year's rent on. The same office Ethan claimed he built from nothing. I forwarded the packet to my attorney. Miriam Shaw. With one sentence, please review for forgery, unauthorized occupancy, and attempted tenancy creation. Miriam called me 8 minutes later. She did not waste time with sympathy. That was why I liked her. Juliet, she said, do not speak to Ethan alone again. Do not correct his misunderstanding. Do not tell him what you know yet. I looked out at the city through the glass wall of my living room. There is more, isn't there? Miriam exhaled. Possibly. This looks like more than a mistress trying to stay over. This form attempts to establish residency. If he attaches a lease, even a fake one, he may be trying to create a tenant dispute instead of a domestic access issue. I closed my eyes for 1 second, not from fear, from recognition. Ethan had never been original, but he was dangerous when someone smarter was advising him. That someone was probably Carol. Carol had spent 20 years managing rental duplexes she did not own, collecting rent for an elderly cousin, and calling herself a real estate woman. She knew just enough vocabulary to create damage and not enough law to understand consequences. At 2:03 p.m., she confirmed it. She emailed me from her church lady address, the one with a Bible verse in the signature, and wrote, Ethan has every right to remain in his marital home, and Vanessa has a signed agreement allowing her temporary occupancy. If you interfere, we will pursue harassment claims. Attached was a PDF titled Temporary Residential Lease, Unit 1802. Vanessa had signed it. Donate. The lease was only 2 pages, but it was packed with arrogance. It claimed Vanessa Price could occupy the guest suite of Unit 1802 for 90 days at a rent of $1 per month. It claimed Ethan Caldwell was authorized co-owner representative. It claimed I had verbally approved the arrangement during a private marital discussion on June 3rd. On June 3rd. I had been in Denver negotiating a retail development lease with 8 attorneys in a conference room. And I had the hotel invoice, flight record, meeting transcript, and client emails to prove it. Ethan had picked the wrong date because Ethan picked dates the way he picked lies. Quickly, confidently, and without checking whether I kept records. I called Marcus. Did Vanessa ever present this lease to management? He paused. Not formally. But Mr. Caldwell showed something to the evening concierge last night and said Mrs. Monroe had approved a long-term guest. Who was working? I asked. Derek. I knew Derek. 24, polite, new, eager not to offend residents with money. Ethan would have chosen him on purpose. Marcus lowered his voice. Mrs. Monroe? There is also hallway footage from last night. Mr. Caldwell and Miss Price entered with 2 suitcases and several garment bags. He told Derek you were aware, I said. Preserve everything. Marcus answered. Already done. By late afternoon, Ethan's version had spread. Carol called my sister and told her I had snapped from career stress. Mason texted that Ethan was considering a wellness check. Tessa sent me a voice note saying, I know you don't like Vanessa, but punishing Ethan financially is abusive. I listened once, saved it, and forwarded it to Miriam. Nobody asked why Vanessa had my robe. Nobody asked why Ethan packed my suitcase. Nobody asked how a mistress became a caregiver with a $1 lease before breakfast. They did what people do when the truth threatens their comfort. They accepted the lie that required the least courage. At 5:46 p.m., Ethan finally called. I let it go to voicemail. His voice came through tight and mean. Juliet, you're making this worse. Vanessa has a lease. Mom has copies. If you try to keep her out, we'll take it to the residence board and show everyone what you're doing. You don't own people. You don't get to erase me just because you're angry. There was a pause, then the part he should not have said. And if you think your little holding company protects you, wait until the board sees how you use it to bully your own husband. I played the voicemail twice. Then I saved it in a folder labeled Caldwell Divorce Evidence. Not because I was ready to divorce him. I had been ready for that the moment I saw Vanessa in my robe. I saved it because Ethan had just told me his next move. He was going public inside Harborline Tower. He wanted the residence board to pressure me, embarrass me, and treat my ownership like a marital tantrum. He thought wealthy neighbors, polished conference tables, and his mother's performance of concern would make me fold. At 6:12 p.m., the board president emailed both of us. The subject line was, Emergency Residential Conduct Review. Ethan had requested a meeting for the next evening, claiming owner misconduct, unlawful exclusion, and harassment of an approved resident. Attached to his complaint were the fake lease, the forged occupancy addendum, and a written statement from Vanessa saying she feared for her safety around me. I sat alone in my quiet living room, reading every word while the sun dropped behind the skyline. Then I forwarded the entire complaint to Miriam, Marcus, and my private investigator, Dana Cho. My message was simple. They are bringing the fake documents into an official board record. Preserve chain of custody. For the first time that day, I smiled. Me. Ethan thought he was dragging me into a public fight. He had no idea he had just filed the evidence himself. By the next morning, Ethan had stopped calling me his wife and started calling me the problem. I knew because Carol forwarded one of her own texts to me by mistake at 8:09 a.m. It said, "Keep the pressure on. The board needs to see her as dangerous, not just angry. Do not discuss the business loan until after Vanessa is recognized as a resident." 30 seconds later, she sent another message. "Ignore that. It was not for you." I took a screenshot before the second bubble even finished loading. Business loan. That was the first time the word loan entered the story. Until then, I thought Ethan was trying to protect his affair by creating fake occupancy rights for Vanessa. Ugly, humiliating, fraudulent, but still personal. Carol's accidental text changed the shape of the room. Vanessa did not just need a place to stay. Ethan needed Vanessa recognized as a resident before a loan came up. In property law, timing matters. In fraud, timing screams. I called Miriam. Carol mentioned a business loan. Miriam was quiet for 2 seconds. "Do you know what Vanessa does?" "Lifestyle branding," I said. "Which means nothing." "Find out what she has filed," Miriam said. "And Juliet? Do not access anything illegally. Public records, creditor notices, emails sent to you, documents tied to your property. Clean hands." That was Miriam's favorite phrase. Clean hands. It meant you do not win by becoming sloppy. You win by letting sloppy people keep talking. Dana Cho found the first thread before lunch. Vanessa Price had registered a company called Vellum House Wellness 6 months earlier. On Instagram, it looked expensive beige candles, linen robes, sound baths, phrases like feminine abundance and curated healing. On paper, it looked like a sinkhole. No physical location, no real staff, 2 vendor lawsuits and small claims, a dissolved partnership with a woman named Elise Rowe, who had posted exactly one public comment under Vanessa's launch video. Pay people before you preach softness. Vanessa had been trying to open a boutique wellness studio for months, and according to Dana, she had recently applied for a $375,000 small business line of credit. The collateral page made my stomach tighten. Dana sent it as a public UCC filing search result and a lender intake summary provided to a commercial broker she knew. Emotionally. The application referenced residential property interest and long-term occupancy rights at Harborline Tower, Unit 1802, as supporting stability for the borrower. Not ownership, exactly. Ethan was not quite that stupid. But it painted Vanessa as having a secured residence connected to a high-value property, backed by a co-owner spouse authorization. In plain English, Ethan and Vanessa had tried to make my condo look like part of her financial credibility. Then Miriam found the second thread. Ethan had signed a personal guarantor letter for Vanessa's loan application. Not as her boyfriend, not as her investor, as her domestic partner and co-resident. He had attached the fake $1 lease and the forged occupancy addendum as proof. I read the guarantor letter twice, sitting at my dining table with the city bright and indifferent beyond the windows. Ethan had risked my home, my building record, and my name so his mistress could borrow money for a wellness studio built on candles, debt, and another woman's robe. At 1:20 p.m., Ethan texted me. "Tonight can be easy if you stop fighting. Tell the board. Vanessa had permission, and I'll make sure the divorce stays respectful." I looked at the message and felt nothing. Hot. No rage. No heartbreak. Just the clean click of a door locking inside me. I replied for the first time since the morning before. "Bring every document you plan to rely on." He answered almost instantly. "Gladly. You're going to regret acting like you own the whole floor." I saved that one too. Carol arrived at Harborline Tower at 3 p.m., wearing pearls, a cream blazer, and the expression of a woman arriving at church to accuse someone else of sin. Marcus called me from downstairs. "Mrs. Monroe, Mrs. Caldwell, is requesting access to your floor." "Denied," I said. "She says she is here for Ethan. Then she can meet Ethan in the lobby." 10 minutes later, Carol texted me. "You are proving our point," I replied. "Put that in writing for the board." She did. Vanessa tried a softer approach. At 4:18, she emailed me directly. The subject line was, "Woman to woman." I almost deleted it on principle, but evidence sometimes wears perfume. She wrote that she never meant to hurt me, that Ethan told her the marriage had been emotionally over for years, that she had nowhere safe to go, and that denying her access was financial abuse by proxy. Then she made the mistake that saved me hours of investigation. She attached the lease again and wrote, "Ethan said you verbally agreed because you wanted a quiet transition and did not want the building gossiping." I forwarded it to Miriam with the note. She just tied him to the false verbal approval. At 5:30, Miriam arrived with a slim black briefcase and the calm face attorneys wear when the other side has already made their worst mistake. Dana joined by video from her office. Marcus sent over the preserved access logs, hallway footage timestamps, and Derek's written statement that Ethan had presented Vanessa as an approved long-term guest before any approval existed. Then Miriam placed 3 folders on my table. One for the board, she said. One for Ethan's attorney, if he had the wisdom to bring one. One for law enforcement later, depending on how hard he lies tonight. I looked at the folders. What is the cleanest order? Miriam tapped each label. First, access abuse. Second, fake lease. Third, forged owner authorization. Fourth, loan-related use of the property. Do not open with the whole floor unless necessary. I understood. The whole floor was not the first punch. It was the wall Ethan would hit after running out of lies. At 6:41 p.m., the board president emailed the final meeting agenda. Ethan's complaint had grown. He was now alleging emotional cruelty, unlawful lockout, abuse of building influence, harassment of Vanessa, and misuse of corporate ownership to intimidate residents. He had attached Vanessa's statement, Carol's statement, the fake lease, the forged occupancy addendum, and a screenshot of my text saying, "Bring every document you plan to rely on." He thought that message made me look threatening. It made me look prepared. At 7:05, Marcus texted Mr. Caldwell. "Mrs. Caldwell and Miss Price are in the boardroom. Vanessa is crying. Carol brought printed packets. Ethan is telling members you are hiding assets." Miriam closed her briefcase. "Ready?" she asked. I took one last look around my condo, at the suitcase still sitting by the island, because I had decided not to move it yet. It had become useful, a symbol, a reminder. Ethan packed that suitcase because he thought humiliation could relocate ownership. Then I walked to the elevator with my attorney beside me, 3 folders in my hand, and the deed to the entire 18th floor waiting at the bottom of the stack. The Harborline boardroom was designed to make rich people feel reasonable. It had smoked glass walls, leather chairs, a walnut conference table, and a view of the river that made even bad decisions look expensive. Ethan sat at the far end, like a wounded husband preparing to testify against a monster. Carol sat beside him with printed packets stacked in front of her, wearing pearls and moral superiority. Vanessa sat on his other side, eyes red, hands folded, performing fragility with the discipline of a woman who knew tears could sometimes do what facts could not. When I walked in with Miriam, the room went quiet. Ethan looked at the folders in my hand and smiled. He still thought paperwork was a prop. He had no idea it was the only character in the room telling the truth. Board President Helen Markham cleared her throat. "Mrs. Monroe, thank you for coming. Mr. Caldwell has raised serious concerns about access, safety, and resident conduct." Ethan leaned forward before she finished. "My wife locked me out of my home, humiliated my guest, and used building staff like private security because she was angry about our separation." Carol touched his arm like he was a victim on a talk show. Vanessa lowered her eyes. I placed my folders on the table and said, "I am happy to respond to every claim in order." Miriam added, "And we request that all documents submitted by Mr. Caldwell remain part of the official board record." Ethan smiled wider. "Gladly." Helen started with the lease. Ethan claimed Vanessa had been granted temporary occupancy during our marital transition. He said I had verbally approved it because I wanted privacy. Vanessa nodded softly and said, "Prit knew I needed somewhere safe. I thought we had an understanding." I looked at her for the first time. "What date did I approve that?" She glanced at Ethan. "June 3rd. I opened the first folder. On June 3rd, I was in Denver from 6:40 a.m. until 11:10 p.m. Here are flight records, hotel records, client meeting notes, and a signed transcript from an 8-attorney negotiation that lasted most of the day. Emotionally. I never spoke to Vanessa Price. I never approved a lease. The first board member shifted in his chair. Carol jumped in. Busy women can still make phone calls. Miriam slid forward a second document. The lease states approval occurred during an in-person conversation inside Unit 1802 at 4:30 p.m. on June 3rd. Carol's lips pressed together. Ethan stared at the page like it had betrayed him personally. I said, that is the problem with fake documents. They try to sound specific, and then the specifics become evidence. Helen turned to Ethan. Mr. Caldwell, did you prepare this lease? He hesitated. I helped Vanessa because Juliet was being difficult. Miriam said, did you prepare it before or after Mrs. Monroe discovered Miss Price in the condo? Ethan's jaw tightened. That is irrelevant. Miriam's voice stayed even. It was submitted at 8:14 yesterday morning, 42 minutes before Mrs. Monroe arrived home. So it was not a reaction to the confrontation. It was part of the plan. Vanessa's tears stopped. Carol opened her packet, probably looking for a page that could save them. Ethan tried to recover. The point is, I live there. Juliet cannot weaponize technicalities to erase my rights. I opened the second folder. Access logs show Vanessa entered Unit 1803 4 times this week using a temporary vendor code issued by Caldwell Strategic Consulting. There were no approved deliveries, no work orders, and no contractor visits. Unit 1803 is not a shared marital residence. It is separately owned by Monroe Harbor Holdings. One of the board members, Mr. Alvarez, frowned. Why was your guest entering another unit under a vendor code? Ethan said. I was storing things there temporarily. Marcus, standing near the wall, spoke for the first time. Mr. Caldwell had no storage authorization for Unit 1803. Carol snapped. Why is the concierge speaking like he is part of her legal team? Helen looked at her. Because the complaint concerns building access. That shut Carol up for almost 4 seconds, which was a personal record. Then came the forged occupancy addendum. Miriam placed it in front of Helen. This document contains an owner authorization signature purporting to be Juliet Monroe's. Mrs. Monroe did not sign it. The submission came from Caldwell Strategic Consulting's office network. The signature also omits the middle initial Mrs. Monroe uses when signing for Monroe Harbor Holdings. Ethan leaned back. Now she is accusing me of forgery in front of the board. I said, no, Ethan. You submitted the document to the board yourself. He looked at Helen. This is marital conflict. She is trying to criminalize divorce. Miriam answered, no. We are identifying unauthorized documents placed into a residential record and potentially used in a commercial credit application. That sentence changed the temperature of the room. Helen looked up. Commercial credit application. Ethan's face went blank. Carol's hand moved toward her purse. Vanessa whispered, Ethan, you said that was separate. There it was. Not a confession, but close enough to make everyone listen. I opened the third folder. Vanessa Price applied for a $375,000 business line of credit for Vellum House Wellness. The lender packet references long-term occupancy rights at Unit 1802 and attaches the fake lease and occupancy addendum as supporting documents. Ethan signed a guarantor letter as her domestic partner and co-resident. For the first time, Ethan did not speak. He just stared at me with pure hatred. Because hatred was easier than admitting surprise. Carol recovered first. "This is private financial information," Miriam said. "It became relevant when documents involving Mrs. Monroe's property were submitted to this board to support Mr. Caldwell's complaint." Vanessa turned toward Ethan, panic replacing performance. "You told me Juliet was fine with it. You told me the condo helped show stability, not collateral." Ethan hissed, "Stop talking." Helen heard that. So did everyone else. I waited until the room settled, then said, "To be clear, I am not asking this board to resolve my marriage. I am asking the board to correct the building record, revoke unauthorized access, preserve all submitted documents, and acknowledge that Vanessa Price has no approved residency in Unit 1802 or any other unit on the 18th floor." Ethan laughed bitterly. "Any other unit," he repeated. "You keep saying that like you own the building." I looked at him. "Not the building." Then I opened the final page and slid it across the walnut table. "Just the floor." Helen read silently. Mr. Alvarez leaned closer. Carol's face lost color. Vanessa looked from the document to Ethan, then back to the document. Miriam said, "Monroe Harbor Holdings owns units 1801, 1802, 1803, the private storage suite, and the deeded parking spaces assigned to the 18th floor. Mr. Caldwell had spouse access to Unit 1802 only. He had no authority to grant access, lease rights, storage rights, residency rights, or financial representations involving any part of the floor." The silence after that was not dramatic. It was administrative. It was the sound of a lie becoming expensive. Ethan pushed back from the table. "This is insane," I said. "No, this is recorded." He pointed at me. "You hid assets from your husband." Miriam turned one page. "The premarital asset schedule attached to your signed prenup lists Monroe Harbor Holdings and its real estate holdings. You initialed every page." Ethan looked at the document, then at Carol. Carol looked away first. Helen closed the folder slowly. "Pending legal review. Building management will revoke Ms. Price's access immediately, suspend Mr. Caldwell's guest authorization privileges, and preserve all related submissions and footage." Vanessa stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor. "I am not going down for this," she said, looking at Ethan. "You said she was just bitter. You said your mother knew how to handle the board." Carol snapped. "Sit down, Vanessa." Vanessa grabbed her purse. "No, I signed what he gave me because he said Juliet agreed." Then she pointed at Ethan with shaking hands. "And the loan officer only asked about the condo because you told him it was practically yours." Ethan's face turned gray. Miriam picked up her pen and wrote one line on her legal pad. I did not need to see it to know what it said. Self-incrimination. Whoa. By the time the meeting ended, Ethan had lost the board, Vanessa, the building staff, and the story he came there to sell. But the best part was not the look on his face when his keycard privileges were suspended. It was the email that landed on my phone as we stepped into the hallway. Dana Cho had found one more document tied to Vanessa's loan packet. A personal financial statement from Ethan, and on it, under listed assets, he had written 50% ownership interest, Harborline Tower, 18th floor. Dana's email came through just as Ethan was trying to walk past me like a man who still had somewhere powerful to be. I opened the attachment in the hallway outside the boardroom, and there it was. His personal financial statement, submitted with Vanessa's loan packet, listing 50% ownership interest, Harborline Tower, 18th floor. As if marriage had magically turned recorded deeds into community fantasy. Under estimated value, he had written $4.8 million. Under supporting documentation, he had referenced spousal access, shared residence, and pending internal transfer. I read that phrase twice. Pending internal transfer. Ethan had not just lied to a lender. He had invented a future where my property was already moving toward him. Miriam read over my shoulder and went very still. "Do not speak to him," she said. But Ethan saw the screen before she could step between us. For 1 second, his face flashed with panic. Then he did what guilty men do when panic feels too honest. He got loud. "You had no right to dig into my financial documents." I looked at him. "You attached my property to them." Vanessa, still standing near the elevator with mascara under her eyes, turned sharply. "You said Juliet was transferring part of the floor after the divorce," Ethan snapped. "I said stop talking." That was the wrong room for that sentence. Helen Markham had followed us out with 2 board members. Marcus was standing by the wall, and Miriam had her pen ready. Ethan was not controlling a private argument anymore. He was performing fraud in front of witnesses. Carol grabbed his arm. "Ethan, enough." Her voice had changed. Gone was the church lady confidence, the moral lecture, the mother defending her wounded son. Now she sounded like someone watching a house fire reach the room where she kept her own secrets. I turned to her. "Did you help him prepare the financial statement?" Carol's lips parted, but no answer came. Vanessa answered instead. She reviewed everything. Ethan said his mom understood property language. Carol's head whipped toward her. "You ungrateful little idiot," Helen said. "Mrs. Caldwell, this conversation is still occurring in a common area under building security recording." Carol froze. That was the moment the family turned on itself. Not completely. Not beautifully. Just enough. Vanessa knew the loan was collapsing and wanted distance. Carol knew Ethan had dragged her advice into a documented lender file. Ethan knew both women might save themselves by feeding him to the consequences. I stood there, with the suitcase image still fresh in my mind, remembering how certain he had looked when he told me Vanessa needed the condo more than I did. He had believed humiliation would move me. Instead, it had moved every document he forged into the light. Miriam stepped forward. "Mr. Caldwell, we will be forwarding this financial statement, the forged occupancy addendum, the lease, and the guarantor letter to the lender's fraud department, the building's counsel, and Mrs. Monroe's divorce attorney. Any further contact should go through counsel." Ethan laughed once, empty and ugly. "You think you can scare me with paperwork?" I said. "No. I think paperwork is why you're scared." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You'll regret this. I know things about you, too." I looked at Marcus. "Please note that as a threat." Marcus nodded. Ethan looked around and finally realized there was no private corner left for him in a building where he had pretended to be king. The consequences began faster than Ethan expected, but not unrealistically. First, The board issued an emergency notice suspending his guest authorization privileges and confirming Vanessa Price had no approved residency anywhere on the 18th floor. Then, Harborline Towers Council sent a preservation letter requiring all submitted documents, emails, camera footage, access logs, and board materials to be retained. By 10:00 p.m., Miriam had sent the lender a formal notice disputing every claim involving my property. By midnight, Vanessa's credit line was frozen pending investigation. By breakfast, Ethan had 3 missed calls from the loan officer, 2 from his own attorney, and 1 from his business partner asking why Caldwell Strategic Consulting was being named in a document fraud review. He came back to the building at 9:30 the next morning, not to apologize, but to retrieve clothes. Marcus called me first. Mrs. Monroe, Mr. Caldwell, is in the lobby with Mrs. Caldwell. He says he has a right to enter. He may enter Unit 1802 with security escort for personal belongings only. I said, no access to 18011-803 storage, parking records, or management office. Ethan hated that. I could hear him arguing faintly through Marcus's phone. Photographers, she can't supervise my life. Marcus answered calmly, Sir, this is building council's instruction. I stayed in the condo while security escorted Ethan in because I wanted him to see the suitcase still by the kitchen island. I had not touched it since he packed it for me. When he walked in, his eyes went straight to it. You're dramatic, he muttered. I said, No, I'm organized. Carol entered behind him, pale and furious. This has gone far enough, Juliet. Let him take what he needs and stop trying to ruin him. I looked at her. Carol, he listed my floor as his asset on a loan application for his mistress. She lifted her chin. You could have handled this privately. There it was. The family motto of every abuser who gets caught. The problem is not what happened. It is who found out. Ethan shoved clothes into a duffel bag while pretending not to shake. He opened the closet where my legal binders used to sit and found it empty. Looking for something, I asked. He slammed the door. I'm looking for my life before you turned into this, I said. Your life is in the duffel. My life is in the deed records. Carol stepped toward me. Do you enjoy humiliating him? For the first time, I let my voice go cold. No, Carol. I enjoyed loving him. I enjoyed building a home. I enjoyed believing marriage meant loyalty. The humiliation belongs to the man who moved his mistress into my condo and forged my signature before breakfast. Ethan zipped the duffel so hard the pull tab snapped. Then his phone rang. He looked at the screen and went still. Vanessa. He answered on speaker by accident. Or maybe because panic had made him careless. Her voice came through sharp and breathless. The lender called. They said the application is suspended and I need independent counsel. Ethan, did you forge Juliet's signature or not? Carol whispered. Hang up, Ethan said. Vanessa, not now. She shouted. You told me Carol handled the language. You told me Juliet would fold because she hates scenes. I looked at Carol. Carol looked at the floor. Security stood silently near the hallway, but I saw one of them glance at Marcus. Another witness. Another clean record. Ethan ended the call and shoved the phone into his pocket. She's lying, he said automatically. I said, about which part? He had no answer. By noon, my divorce attorney, Rebecca Lorne, filed the initial petition with emergency requests attached: preservation of financial records, exclusive use of premarital property, no unauthorized access to Monroe Harbor Holdings assets, and notice of suspected document fraud. Ethan's attorney called Rebecca within the hour, suddenly very interested in a respectful resolution. That phrase made me laugh for the first time in 2 days. Men like Ethan always discover respect after the evidence gets numbered. The final collapse came that evening, when Harborline's board sent a formal letter to all involved parties. Vanessa's access was permanently revoked. Ethan's access was restricted to scheduled, escorted retrieval of personal belongings pending divorce orders. Carol was barred from entering residential floors without written authorization after attempting to influence staff with false ownership claims. And every document Ethan submitted was being referred to building council for review. At 7:18 p.m., Ethan sent me one final text. After everything I gave you, you're really choosing property over family. I looked around the quiet 18th floor, the home I bought before him, the walls he lied inside, the view he tried to sell to another woman. The piece I had almost forgotten was mine. Then I typed back, "No, Ethan. I'm choosing truth over theft." I blocked him before he could answer. Okay,